Alrighty, and we're on.
We're on, my friend.
So I'm sitting here with Diogo, and
Yes.
you're obviously quite well known for the 5'8" take.
Yes.
Yep.
Yes. This universe that I've sort of created out of thin air that is the 5'8" take.
So we were just talking before. So you've taken the name Diogo Da Silva,
Yes.
but you mentioned so it was a bit of a change, right? Like, so what was the original name?
Yeah, I've tried to go, I don't know the last year has been fucking insane, mate.
Yeah.
It's mind-blowing what I've gone through, and just in general through self and universe and beliefs and understanding and history and all of that, which made me dig into my past.
Mm-hmm.
So from Brazil, Dad left when I was 4.
Yep.
I was figuring out surnames.
Yep.
And what I realized is I found my old birth certificate, and on my birth certificate, I don't know what this means. I'm still digging into it, but on my birth certificate, Da Silva is on both sides.
Okay.
So on my father's side is Da Silva, and on my mother's side it's Da Silva as well. And so I've taken Correa,
Yep.
which is my mother's side, and then I've just, instead of Coelho, which is my father's, this gets complicated.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
But yeah, which is my father's side, I've thrown that one away, and so I'm going by Diogo Correa da Silva legally,
Okay.
and the same as my son, he's Correa da Silva.
Correa da Silva. Okay. All right. So anyway, for context, right? So we're sitting at Braddah Jiu Jitsu in Artarmon.
Yes.
Right, so a bit of a name change there. I don't know if we want to talk about it or not, but we can leave that out. But you know, for you've obviously been training here for how long now?
I've been training here for since it opened. So we opened here for we're 3 and a bit years now that we've been here.
Yep.
So I've been training since the inception, all through COVID, through everything. We've had this spot, which is a blessing of a place.
So were you training jiu-jitsu before this?
Yeah, so I was at Movement MMA for a while, which is North Ride. Great guys there.
Yep.
They do a bit of Muay Thai and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu.
Mm-hmm.
At this academy, we just do Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. We specialize in that. And then prior to that, I started at the Cult, Gracie Barra.
Poha.
So I started there.
It's very interesting, you know. I think a lot of people might refer to them a bit cult-like like that.
Yeah.
And I don't want to, you know, I'm not saying that to speak ill of any organization. It's just interesting when it becomes its own ecosystem.
Yeah.
Right. And I think, you know, one of the things that is great about jiu-jitsu is because people take it so seriously. And yes, it is an expensive sport. You pay a lot to do jiu-jitsu.
Yeah.
But on the flip side, you know, because you generally pay a lot to do jiu-jitsu, theoretically speaking, your instructors should also be able to give you quite a lot as a result of it, because, you know, when you think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right?
100%.
You fill the bottom layers of the pyramid where, you know, you don't have to worry about food and shelter and how do you sustain yourself. And then you can start thinking about, you know, how do you now activate, you know, your knowledge and activate your teaching so that you can help other people live inspired lives.
100%.
Right? And the reason why I think that is a positive thing is because in the more traditional mentality of martial arts, so if we talk about karate and kung fu and these sorts of traditional styles, so to speak, it was very much, you know, you do these things not for money, but for passion. The problem is that if you can't sustain yourself and you can't survive, what your mind is thinking about how to survive. You're not thinking about how do you now elevate your art, how do you develop the art so that other people can get better and better at it. And likewise, you don't really, you know, if you're worried about how to put food on the table, you're not really worried about how do you teach somebody how to become a better fighter or a better practitioner of that particular style.
100%.
So I think, you know, there's a nice meeting of both worlds that sort of happens in this crossover into the current state of mixed martial arts and things like that. But I think, you know, there's merits in both of those ideologies. Yeah. Right. And I'm always very conflicted because, you know, I grew up in that karate, kung fu mindset.
Right.
And in doing, you know, traditional martial arts. And it was like, you know, you do this for the love of doing it, you know. and but seeing some of the benefits of being able, once you take food and shelter, the bottom layer of the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, off the table, you can see how much more invested somebody can become in it. And you can see that, with the guys who, really invest in their students and do a lot of study and spend that time developing their teaching methods, first of all, and their understanding of jiu-jitsu, they can then progress athletes at a much faster pace than the guys who don't.
Yeah, and it grows the sport. Like, the thing that the Gracies did was give an avenue to create this into a business and live off it. And then once you can do that, as you said, you can develop fighters, you can develop the art itself. Then the whole sport it spreads as it has. And then people can develop new techniques. You see no-gi developing so much. It's grown immensely. People like, Craig Jones, Gordon Ryan, the Rotolo brothers, new generation, Mika Galvão coming through. And it, with Baja, it's just a meme, really, that it's like, people call it a cult. They dress up in all red. They have all of their tracksuits coming into events. They come in a pack, but it's a bit of fun. At the end of the day, everyone in the jiu-jitsu community is very friendly and very supportive of each other. And that's one thing that I like. And I think Gordon has come in and sort of flipped that on its head online, but I also understand what he's doing, right? Yeah. He's trying to make big fights, garner attention, get paid, and bring more eyeballs into the sport, which I think is fantastic. Some people try to follow his footsteps, like Marigali, but I don't know, it doesn't really, it doesn't fit the mold. But yeah, it's an amazing... Jiu-jitsu's this amazing universe that's never ending. Its gi is forever changing as much as it's staying the same. And no gi is it's developing in itself. You have Eddie Bravo that came in and did all his techniques, and then everyone thought that this is the way for MMA. And then you had, Danaher that came in, and then you got everyone leg locking. And then, you got Gordon Ryan does one waterboard technique, and then everyone's like in the classes are trying to do that. So that's also new. It's also evolving. Like, it's a beautiful sport. And I feel it's a little different than... Like, I also grew up in karate. Karate was the first martial arts I did. And I feel jiu-jitsu is it does have that I don't know, how do you pull it? It has that spiritual martial arts aspect of it, but it originated with a bunch of Brazilians storming gyms. You know what I mean? Yeah. It's like, it does have that, but it's also got this very, like, practical element to it, which I love.
Well, so that's one of the things that I think most fighting styles were born out of the need for combat, right? So if you go back and I think, you think in terms of history, right? Why would anybody want to be training? Well, you'd be training to survive. Yeah. Right? So if you go back, say 500 years where there's people getting killed, and there's lots of wars and all these sorts of things, like, when human life wasn't valued as much as it is today, and people didn't live as long as they do today, the practical element was always there. But what happens over time, and we can use Kung Fu as a prime example of this, that, the art that was originally there, and what happens over time as, people become, like, violence becomes more abhorrent, so to speak. So you're not fighting to no longer kill somebody. You're now fighting to maybe incapacitate them or to control them or whatever the case may be. And as that sort of progresses, then what happens is that the art sort of, it does water down a little bit. And then, when killing somebody is absolutely frowned upon, you can no longer, use it for combat situations. And, as an example, when they, in Japan, when they had the Edo era and they took away samurai swords and they said, it's not legal for you guys to carry samurai swords anymore. You're now seeing, like, over time, because those things are now unacceptable, the things have to move and progress in a different direction. So I guess for Kung Fu, where that sort of happened is that then went to this Wushu style, where the moves may have had practical usage at one stage, but because they're no longer being applied in practice under pressure testing and under combat situations, they develop their own sort of style and they become a bit flowery and dynamic in their movement because now they're judging it based on how it looks, not how it actually applies, right? And so this is the danger, right? Like if you, I always like to use this analogy, right? That for anything to grow and develop, you need to have structure.
Yeah.
Right. So, you can't have anarchy and then expect somebody to be able to work out what the hell is going on.
Yes.
Right. And that's one of the great things about, when you go and study in any sort of martial art, typically there is a structure and they say, okay, we're going to teach you these basics first. And this is, you need to have the vocabulary first to understand what are the moves.
Yeah.
And then we can start talking about how do we string the sentences together. The problem is that as you progress through that art, if the cage doesn't grow with you and the structure doesn't grow with you, well, there's a point where that becomes a prison.
Yeah.
Right? Because you might have this understanding that there are other things outside of this structure that you're provided with, but you can't get out of the cage. Right? So it's a double-edged sword, but I think, for any sort of progression and growth of an individual, you need to have structure. It's just like when you teach your kids how to read. You can't just go and say, here's a book, go and read. Right? They look at you and they go, I have no idea what this is. You got to start with what are the letters, and then you got to go with the phonetics and go, okay, even though we say A, B, C, it's A, B, K, and how do they then form words, and then how do we now form sentence structure, right?
Yeah.
But if I kept, going back to those basics and getting my child to sound out every single word when they're trying to write creative writing stories, as an example, right? Now I'm stifling their progress as well. So, I guess to sort of bring that full circle, I think, it's great to have structure, and I think it's very, very important, especially for youth and as you're growing, to have these structures around you and these systems that allow you to sort of grow and progress.
Definitely.
But it's also very important to recognize when those structures then can become a hindrance.
Yeah.
And I guess the lesson there for teachers and instructors or parents is that, you need to grow the cage at the rate that your student or your child is growing.
Yeah.
Right? Like if I continue to helicopter my parent when they're 20 years old, all I'm going to do is facilitate a very poor relationship with my child.
Yeah, you gotta let it flow. And one thing, like the kata, for example, going back to karate. I don't know Kung Fu too much, so I can't speak on it. But the
kata forms, what do you want to call it?
So the kata, for example, when I was doing the kata, I thought it was a prison. I was like, we're doing a full class, then we get to spar, and then afterwards we got to do this kata. We sort of got to learn this dance that to me doesn't seem like it had a practical
element.
Yeah. And now I look back at the kata, and what I see is I see it more like a flow of energy, like a meditation of sorts. Yep. And that's to that point. You sort of got to create these things, see how it's structured, it has a purpose, but also beyond that is understanding the element of the meditation, of letting it flow through the body, which is the way that I see it now. And completely agree. So you do have to have both those aspects, or else it does become a cage. If you don't elevate, like if I hadn't elevated to seeing the kata the way that I do now, I'd still see it as this thing that is just something that doesn't make sense. We just have to do, which then you don't develop and grow.
Yeah. Well, I think that always comes back to how clear is the purpose. Like if the purpose isn't defined. So as an example, if you're teaching kata and you go and say to your student, oh, you're using the kata so that you can fight, and then you go and throw them in a fighting situation and then all the kata is thrown out the window, it's you've defined the purpose incorrectly, right? But if you redefine the purpose of the kata is that, hey, we're building up your basics so that, as an example, when you move in combat, you retain your stances. When you throw your strikes, they're clean and crisp. We work on your breathing because a lot of kata has a lot of breathing elements in it so that you can control your breath. Well, I think that is the appropriate way to then, define what the purpose is. And then your student also then goes, okay, I need to do these things so I can get better at my control, my proprioception. It's like drilling in jiu-jitsu, right? Like if I go and say, here's a Toriando pass, but you never drill it, you never become effective at that movement,
Yeah.
right? But if you drill it 100 times and you get used to that particular movement, then you can go and say, okay, I know how to do it now. Now I've got to do it live with, somebody resisting against me. Okay, these are the hurdles that I'm coming up, and let's now troubleshoot what are those problems, right? But you have to define the purpose clearly. And I think what's happened with a lot of traditional styles is that they've sort of lost sight of the purpose. In the sense that, if the original purpose was for combat, a lot of people aren't teaching for self-defense and combat anymore. They might say they are, but then teaching things that aren't for self-defense and aren't for combat.
Yeah.
Right? So I think it's a trap. A lot of people have to be very mindful of that, and also, as an individual, what is your purpose in doing this? Right? Because not everybody comes to compete and wants to, throw themselves in a cage or get into combat. Right? Yeah. Your purpose might just be for health and fitness.
Yeah, purpose might even be to just feel better. Yeah. And Aikido might make you feel good.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then you can continue down that path, and that's absolutely fine.
Yeah, but you just have to be clear in your purpose first, because otherwise you just don't have direction.
Yeah.
Right? So let's wind it back, because I always like to go back to the start with people.
Yes, let's do it.
So were you born here, or where were you born?
I was born in a little rural town called Italva. It's in rural Rio, so Rio de Janeiro, Carioca.
Yep.
And there was one hospital there, 2 rooms, and I was born in that hospital. I was in a farm. There was 2 rooms. There was about 7 of us that lived in there.
Yep.
We'd go up to milk the cows and bring the milk back. We didn't have a bathroom. We'd have to go down this hill and then into a well that my grandfather built.
Wow.
And we'd grab water from there, and then that's how we had showers. So that's where I was born.
Yep.
And then we moved into Macaé, which is a favela location in Macaé, which is about 3 hours from Rio City.
Okay.
And then I started my primary school there. My mother met my stepdad. They're now separated, but the father of my sisters.
Okay.
And we moved to Perth. And then from Perth, I made my way over here. The one thing, why I came to Sydney was always interesting. I found it, fascinating. It's like I kept going back to Rio, right? Back to this poverty-stricken place, which my grandma, my cousins, when we go back, that's where we go to.
Yep.
And I found it fascinating that as a kid, I was like, I want to move back there. I was in Perth, living this middle-class life.
Yep.
But as a kid, I want to go back to poverty.
Yep. So wait, let's go back one step. So
yeah.
What age did you go to Perth? So how many years did you have growing up in Brazil versus?
I was 10.
10.
Yeah.
And for my own curiosity's sake, when your parents basically said, we're moving to Perth, or your mum said, we're moving to Perth.
Yeah.
How did you take that?
I was annoyed. I was like, I don't really want to go. I was a kid, but I didn't know if it gives a better life. I didn't know any of that, right? So
did you speak English at that point?
Nah, no English.
No English, okay.
Yeah. So to me, I was I had no concept of I have no concept of the outer world, the planet that we live in.
Yep.
I only knew those little areas that I knew, you know what I mean? So it wasn't like I was on the internet or anything like that. I didn't even think I was accessed the internet back then. So I've heard of America.
Yep.
That's it.
Yeah.
That's all I heard of. So for me, we were going to another town because we were always moving. Ever since we moved to Macaé, we were always moving around. It felt like every week we moved to a new place.
Did that make it hard for you in terms of finding friends or generating friends?
I was always a happy kid. So there was, when you're in poverty like that, your neighbors are very welcoming. You're sort of in, what they say about battle zones, you actually are in them. So if you live in a battle zone, you're its commodities through the roof, right? So it's not like I really had a tough time gelling in a new neighborhood like you would in Australia, where you go into a new neighborhood and your neighbor doesn't even want to talk to you. There, it was like everyone was very welcoming and they looked after you. So my mum, single mum, right? So whenever she had to go to work or whatever, like we'd move into a new place and already I'd be looked after by a stranger.
Wow.
And it was just normal.
Yeah.
You know? So, yeah, it wasn't too hard finding friends in that.
Yeah. And then what was the reason for going to Perth? Like, did your mum find a job there, or how did you guys get there?
She was a maid, and she had to work this event, and then she just met my stepdad, who's he was there from Australia in oil. So he went there for some Petrobras thing, and not like some oil executive, but if you work in oil rigs, you just go all around the world. You just go to different oil rigs. Sure. So I think he was in Brazil at the time. I actually don't know his story. And they met at a party, and at first she didn't like gringos. Yeah. She didn't want to be with them. But afterwards she was like, they met and got together. So, and then after that he was like, come to Perth. They spent a little time together. They were around together for about 2 or 3 years, and then they said, come to Perth, and then we moved over, which was,
And then out of curiosity, when you, that would have been your first time on a plane, right?
Yeah.
And do you remember how it felt? Were you shitting yourself?
Hey, yeah, come to think about it, I don't remember what, like, I thought it's just so foreign. It was just like I'm going on a nicer bus. Because in Brazil, you have these coaches, which were amazing. Like you, when you're going from one town to another, you have these coaches that you get on, and I just thought it was just a really nice bus. Like I was a kid, like I knew nothing really. Yep. Yeah. So it was different, but it wasn't. Yeah.
And then okay, sorry. I want to go back and ask you one more question about living in Brazil. Can you describe what life was like living in the favelas? Like, what do you remember, just from your perspective, right? Like, like for you to think when you came to Australia that you wanted to go back. Obviously, it was quite a happy time for you, right?
It was. It's happiness in chaos. It's happiness in one story that I tell. Coach Lucas is here. He doesn't even know this story, right?
Okay.
We're in Macaé, and we're in this favela. This favela has 2 hills going up. This is how horrific and I don't know, like insane it can be, beautiful in essence, but also devastating. So there's 2 hills. We play kites, right? Kites was a big thing in Brazil back then. And you'd go and you try and, fight each other's kites, and then one would get cut, and then the kite will fall down, and then the kids would go and run and get it, right? So one thing, I remember this so vividly. All of us were standing at the bottom of the hill. This kite gets cut. Kite flies over to the other side. Everyone runs up this hill, right? And there's these things called paralelepípedo, which is it's like brick roads. Okay. So they're not like flat roads. And then the bricks they're pretty jagged. Yeah. Right. We're running up this road, and then this kite comes down. All these kids are trying to get this kite. This kid gets this kite, and then like he's holding the kite. This other kid who's on the other side of me gets jealous, grabs the thing and just throws it. I see it, I duck, and it hits this kid on the side of the head. Wow. This kid drops, everyone starts running. I'm there in shock. I'm just in shock. I'm like, this kid is gone. Yeah. I run to the house. I just knock on a thing, like call cops, anyone. Like, I don't know. Then I just bolt because every other kid's bolting. I thought this kid was dead. And 6 months later, I see this kid. And he had like his skull was just gone from the side like that.
Wow.
But that's the thing. It's like you're in a pack. Everyone is so happy and friendly. The beauty of a kite, like
falling
just
down,
falling beautifully into the ground. All these kids laughing, going up to just utter chaos and death.
Yeah.
And that's what it's like living in a favelas.
Wow. So then when you got to Perth, you would have gotten out and gone, where the hell am I?
Yeah. which explains so teachers try to always say that I had ADD. My mum has always been in a fight with schools about ADD. And I think that's something in itself. I don't know how kids come and gel into another culture, but I don't think the answer is just saying kids have ADD. You know, like
my teachers used to say that about me. They used to ask my mother, do you feed this guy red cordial? Right? Like that's what I shit you not. That's what they used to ask my mum, and my mum would be like, no. And I see it in my own son. When I look at Harley, it's just a very, a very, what's the word to put it? I'll say it's like a very innocent but curious way to view the world.
Yeah. Right?
And it's interesting because when I watch him do certain things, it's like you go, oh, this is interesting. Like, why does he look at it like that? Why does he view things like that? And so as an example, like complete contrast. So Cadence, my eldest, she's very good at, she can occupy herself. So when she was starting to learn how to color in and things like that, or learning how to draw, she would like be hiding under a table somewhere and pick up pen and paper and just start drawing. And used to draw all these, pictures and use up all this paper. Yeah. And then so she gets very fixated on things. Like when it came to, she learned how to use scissors. She'd be taking the scissors and then hiding somewhere and then cutting up all this paper and leaving all these scrap paper everywhere, right? Whereas my son is not interested in ABCs, not interested in letters or drawing or anything like that. Yeah. But you go and show him, I don't know, like whether it's a little dinosaur toy or something like that. Yeah. And he'll get fixated on that. So it's like they get obsessed about different things, but these are things that are innate in them. We don't, it's not like I've gone and cultivated and say, oh, Cadence, you need to be good at drawing, and Harley, you need to love dinosaurs. They have this own little bit of their own personality. Yeah. Right? And I think just from I've got some experience in terms of mental health and mental wellness through my own family. Like, my mum had some mental health struggles, and, when people don't necessarily view the world the same the same way that, say, the majority of people view the world. Yeah. We're very quick to jump on that and say, oh, this person's weird or they're different or whether it's, nowadays we call it autism or ADHD or whatever the case may be. But I think, just certain people, just like the same way we understand that people learn differently. Like some people can learn, you can tell somebody an instruction and they'll learn it like that. Other people, they need to do it themselves. Yeah. Some can do it by touch, some can do it by sight or listening. Just like how we intake information, some people have to watch videos, other people can listen to a podcast. Yeah. Some people like to read. Like we all have our different ways of learning things. So, when you watch how different people sort of intake information and how they interpret that information, like a lot of the times we jump to this conclusion that, oh, it's this or it's that, just because it may not be the normal in terms of what we've been exposed to, right? So, going back to your teachers, then saying, oh, this Diogo's got a bit of ADD or whatever. Do they try and medicate you? Do they go to your mum? Oh, you need to get him on Ritalin. Yeah, yeah, yeah. They straight up. They these are like normal teacher. They even got a psych in, and like they heavily try to do it because I was just an active kid, you know. Like, and I didn't know. Yeah, I didn't know English much at all. Like, I had to get taken out into my own class. Yep. And have cards that said cat, and then they'd say cat, and I learned English super quick. Like, to me, like I could generally speak within. This is gonna sound like bullshit, but within 3 months, I was fairly like could have a conversation. Yeah, and kids learn quick, I guess. Like, but
yeah, they tried to bring a psych in, have a full medication. My mum had to fight to say no, that's not the case. And yeah, no, I'm glad she did. Otherwise, I'll be, knees deep in ADHD pills or, knees deep in pills in general.
Yeah. Yeah, it's crazy, the whole Ritalin thing. Like, I think, that was probably the angle that the teachers would probably have loved for me as well.
Yeah.
But my mum being like a Asian mum, she's like, no, there's nothing wrong with my son,
Yeah, that was the same as mine, yeah.
Right? So, I got to avoid it all. But it was funny, like, I remember when you're in high school, it's like there's almost like a black market for Ritalin because people think that it's going to help you study better and get better grades.
Yeah. In university, it was a big thing.
Yeah.
It was like everyone just like, they took Ritalin to make them focus. But I don't know. I don't think you need drugs to do it.
Yeah, you don't need exogenous things. I think focus is actually just like anything. It's a bit of a skill.
Yeah.
Right? And the more that you work that muscle, that muscle of discipline or the muscle of focus, today you might only be able to focus for 5 minutes.
Yeah.
But then, the next day you might be 10 minutes and then 15 and then, you can build up that tolerance to it.
Yeah.
But a lot of the times you don't have focus for the things that you don't enjoy. That's more so what it is. Like, for anybody that gets into a sport, you go and say, oh, play this sport all day, they'll probably be like, oh, yeah, no problem. And it's like, oh, read this. And it's like, oh, this is the most boring book ever. And you struggle to garner your attention towards it.
Can I ask you something?
Yep.
So, leading up to your last fight, right, which congratulations on winning that bout. It was great to see. Your focus leading up that week, because going into like any comps that I've done in the past, like I sort of tune things out. Do you do the same?
Yeah.
Especially leading into an MMA fight?
Like, I think my perspective on this has changed as I've grown and matured as well.
Yeah.
Right? So when I first started competing, it was very much like, like lots of very high energy, coming into it very pumped. Yeah. And I remember the first fight that I ever did was a pancration fight. So pancration back then was like the MMA in that time where it was actually run by PCYC through the wrestling clubs. So you'd actually compete on a wrestling mat. And my very first pancration fight, so pancration, back then we didn't have hits to the head, so you couldn't punch or kick to the head.
Okay.
But wrestling and takedowns, you could strike to the body, and
so you could do ground and pound, but to the body.
To the body. Yeah.
Right.
So I guess it's almost very similar to, so in MMA now we sort of have A, B, and C grade rules.
Yeah.
And so C grade rules, they typically wear shin guards. In some comps, they might specify for headgear or whatever. But they typically don't allow rotational leg lock finishes, which is obviously common sense.
Yeah.
They don't allow cranks, so manipulation of the spine or the neck.
Fair.
And they don't allow elbows, and they allow knees to the body. Okay. They allow hits to the head, but on a grounded opponent, you can't hit to the head.
Yeah.
Right? So that's like the C grade MMA rules currently. And then depending on the state, every state sort of does things a little bit different.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, depending on the state, there might be some minor changes to that. But so pancration, I guess, would have been like that C grade style of competition back then. Mm-hmm. And I remember, my very first fight, right after it, I had so much adrenaline pumping through me that I couldn't close my hands anymore. Like I just had that pump where my forearms were just so jacked up.
Yeah. Stiff. Yeah.
Right? And it was like, and then it was like, okay, you got maybe 10, 15 minutes before, you go to your next round and you fight your next fight. And I think most jiu-jitsu competitors, if they've competed for the first time, will have felt that. Yeah. Especially in the gi where you've used the grips and you've grabbed onto somebody and you've grabbed so tight that you've locked up your forearms. And after it's like, you need somebody to massage your forearms, right?
Yeah.
You have this fight or flight response and you don't know how to control that adrenaline and that energy. And that typically leads to an adrenaline dump. I think for me now, it's more like, I guess how I approach things is that I just really try and live as normally as possible.
Mm-hmm.
So when I say that, so in the lead up to that last fight at XFC, everything was pretty much the same for me. The amount of training that I did was the same. I didn't really, my tapering was just me just taking it easy in the last week.
Yeah.
So being very specific about, the people that I would train with to make sure that there's no awkward movements and any risk of injury.
Yeah.
also to allow the body to heal. But I'd still train in that last week just so that I can get the movement in. And I did a podcast maybe the week before my fight. But then the week of the fight, I said, look, I'm not doing any podcasts because I'm fighting.
Mm-hmm.
So I try and just live as normally as possible, because for me, when I approach competition nowadays, it's no different to training, right?
Yeah. Yes. And that is such a key message to any competitor at all. Like, if you take these competitions, sure, you got to be competitive. You got to have that competitive instinct inside.
Yep.
But taking it and making that switch from being like, I'm going into a fight, to being like, I'm going into a training match that I'm going to win.
Yeah.
You must have, like, it's weird. You don't want to win training matches.
Well,
you know what I mean?
Yeah, you got to define the purpose, right? The purpose of training is to improve.
Yes.
Right? So you winning all the time isn't necessarily conducive to you improving.
Yes.
Because you might just be playing your normal game and never developing the weapons that you need when the competition gets harder.
100%.
Right? So that's one of the key differences between training and competition. Competition is there to, and I think, for me, the goal wasn't necessarily for me to win that fight.
Yeah.
The goal for me at the time was I just wanted to showcase my abilities.
Uh-huh.
Right? So I wasn't really, yes, of course, if you were to say, oh, well, what if you lost? Well, of course, you want to win. But
Yeah.
I wanted to have a good showing more so than I wanted to win.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, Demetrius Johnson did a podcast with Joe Rogan, and he actually talked about this in the lead up to his second fight with Adrian Moraes. And he was saying, he wasn't so attached to the outcome. He was more attached to just being in the moment and having that freedom. And that's very much how I approached my fight in XFC, was that I just wanted to be in the moment, enjoy the energy, enjoy the atmosphere. I think a lot of the times when you focus on all of these exogenous things like, how you feeling or how your camp is or what your opponent's doing, like I wasn't focused on any of that. I already done my study. I'd watched his fights. I knew what to expect. I worked out a rough idea in terms of how I wanted to approach it.
Mm-hmm.
And look, it didn't pan out the way that I wanted, because there was there was a setup that I wanted. I hit the setup, but it didn't land the way that I wanted it to. And so, look, I didn't get the finish, which was unfortunate. But you just go back to the drawing board, and you then, when you're in that moment, you then work out, okay, what's the next way? What's the next strategy?
Reset.
Reset. And I think a lot of people would comment, I looked ultra relaxed in there, and I was.
Yeah.
Because I didn't put any extra emotion into the lights. And, like Danaher calls it the plank parable, that if he was to put a wooden plank on the floor and ask you to run across it, you could do it with your eyes closed. But you now go and put it 50 stories up in the air, where there's a real risk that if you fall off, you're going to die. A lot of people would freeze and not be able to do it.
Yeah.
But whether it's the plank on the ground or the plank in the air, it's the same thing. You've done it so many times before. So, yeah, like for me, in the warm-up rooms, like I basically just lay down and closed my eyes and just relaxed and didn't do anything until probably the last sort of 10, 15 minutes before my fight.
See, that's what I do before matches, and I don't know if I'm too relaxed. How do you know when you don't have, like, is your plank too low? Do you have to stack a bit of plank? Because when I'm about to go into a match, my people go angry, people go mad warm-ups, insane. My body goes into this weird zen and I've always been like this. I've like in the past as a kid, we had a little band when I was 15, right?
Yep.
And we'd go on our way to the stage, all the guys would be anxious and that, and I'd fall asleep.
Yep.
And then I'd get there to perform, and that's just how my body reacts. Do you feel that it's too calm at times, and is there such thing as being like too calm before a fight?
There is such a thing as being complacent, right? But I think, as long as you have that distinction between complacency and calm, as they always say, the calm before the storm, right?
Yeah.
So I don't think there's any harm in being calm. I think, first of all, like, this is just generalistic, right? Like every individual is different in terms of how they need to approach things. Some people need to develop that energy. Like for me, it's more, I'm very self-aware in terms of that I'm a high energy person to begin with. And so if I then amp it up even further, I'm not operating with a cool head. So for me, I always want to be calculative in terms of how I approach things. So for that, I need to be calm. I need to have a warm body, but a cold heart is how I would say it, right? So that when I get in there, yeah, I can be violent. I can, you know, and I'm going to enjoy the violence. Like, if there's one thing that I really love about mixed martial arts is that freedom of expression when you're in there, there's nothing like that feeling. Yeah. You know, and especially like depending on the rule set, like, you know, in my bout, I was allowed knees to the head. Like, when else can you knee somebody in the head? Like, it sounds very violent, and I apologize if that sounds very violent, but it's just one of those things. It
sounds beautiful.
Well, like it's not just the actual, you know, trying to knee somebody in the head isn't actually as easy as you think. You know, you got to get the setup right. You need to get the positioning right. But man, when you land it, it's just like, ooh, it's such a nice feeling, right? It's the same thing in jiu-jitsu where, you know, you hit that submission and you just go, oh, like that's, you know, it just gives you that, I don't know, whether it's a shot of adrenaline or oxytocin or whatever hormone it is, you know, your body just releases it and you're just like, ooh, you know, and I have this thing where I think, you know, a lot of people, we remember smells, right? Like when you walk into a hospital, you know the smell of a hospital, you know, and that's why, like, you know, KFC, when you smell KFC in the air, you know it's KFC, or Subway, and these sorts of things that have a specific scent. For me, I love the smell of the leather gloves, you know, especially when they're new and you smell that leather and it's just like, like every time I smell those gloves, it just takes me back to that moment. Yeah. And I think there's a beauty in that, right? It's probably not beautiful to everyone, you know. Some people
say that there's coaches, and these are like also life coaches and everything like that. These individuals, life coaches, there is this particular thing with scent. Yep. And I think even that guy who's did Leonardo DiCaprio play in that movie,
Jordan Belfort.
Even he has his own little thing that he sells now. So these life coaches, they say that for something good that happens to you, you have a particular scent that you should smell. And for other things that continuously good happen to you, you should have these things that you smell. So then it reminds you of these particular. You almost neurologically trick your brain. So when you're going through even a bad patch, you can change your neurological outcome of what you're about to do, which I find fascinating. And so scent is a big thing. Yeah, which is interesting.
Yeah. Well, I think you know, it's like when they took. I don't know if I can't remember if I'm getting it right here, but there was like studies about you know, stretching out or like, you know, making yourself bigger, so to speak, so that when you have to handle a tough phone call or something like that, you feel more confident. Yeah. And that goes in line with, like, you know, I think the tagline was along the lines of that fake it till you make it sort of stuff. Like if you lack confidence and then doing some of these things to try and give yourself that confidence. Yeah. Ultimately, I still come back to, you know, competence breeds confidence, right? Yeah. So if you're competent in what you've done, then there is no reason why you shouldn't feel confident. I think a lot of the times people would go and put other people on a pedestal. So, and I think, you know, we've seen that in combat sports in Australia for a long time, where it's like, oh, you know, we're only in Australia, we can't compete on the international stage, but, you know, some of the biggest names in the sport are out of Australia. Yeah. Right? And it's about, you know, so a lot of the things that I'm doing...
Pound for pound right now is from Australia.
Right? Yeah. So, you know, I think when guys, especially the younger generation coming through, can see that and they see these guys at the events, it's like, you know, that could be you. Yeah. Right? That could absolutely be you. You know, and putting the other person on a pedestal doesn't help you get there. Yeah. Right? Like, no. I think ultimately when you're... So for me, as I said, the focus for me wasn't my opponent at all when I got in there. It was all on me. You know, how am I reacting to this? What am I doing? And it's more of like, even though there is somebody in front of me, the battle isn't against them. The battle is against myself. Yeah. How composed can I stay? How calm can I be? So for me, when I compete, there is never really any animosity. I don't need to harbor any animosity towards my opponent. I don't. Yeah, I can operate very coolly and calmly, just in the moment and just enjoying myself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
As Coach Lucas always says, enjoy the journey.
Yeah.
Enjoy it. Enjoy it. Have
Yeah.
fun. Have fun. Every comp.
Yeah.
Hey, coach.
And even after the experience, right? Like, there's a saying that I really like, and it's these moments don't define you, they refine you.
Yeah.
Right? So win or lose, right? They're going to help you progress, provided that you actually spend the time to process it and move on.
Yeah.
Right. So, you don't live on your successes and just go, I was successful and this is the only way that I need to do it. Because that was a lesson that I learned. I won my first pancration fight, but that actually led me to subsequent losses.
Yeah.
Because I was thinking that, I can get away with just doing what I'm doing. I don't need to add anything else to my game. And then when I lost subsequently, I was so pig-headed that I approached it and I was like, oh, no, I can still win.
Yeah.
So I just got unlucky. Like how? That's so. It was so fucking juvenile of me to think like that.
And winning can set you back as well. Like the ADCC here that I won, it's one of those things that is like you did something and then it's like, oh, I'm scared to go in again and fail. You know what I mean? But like as it's cliche that they say that like failure actually is better sometimes than a win. A lot of the times you learn a lot more from failing than you do from winning. And a lot of people have this thing. If they win something, they either give up altogether because they don't want to, they think that's the best that they can do. And they hold themselves back from achieving more. So sometimes it is like good to go in, lose some tournaments, as long as you're continuing to challenge yourself, as long as you continue to learning, as long as you continue to putting yourself out there, you'll get better.
Yeah.
And and that's something I think everyone that competes struggles with. They'll go in, they'll win a competition and they'll be like, you got to go into a competition with the ability to accept defeat.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And understand that, but go in knowing that you're going to win, but be acceptant of failure. And once you're acceptance of failure, you'll try new things, you'll be more fluent in there, and you'll have a higher chance of winning, period.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a lot to be said for that.
Yeah. Well, all the emotions that you feel when you're going into a competition, you got to remember your opponents feel exactly the same thing.
Yeah.
When, in combat, when you're getting your hands wrapped and you feel like you could punch through a brick wall. So could your opponent. They're probably feeling the same way. If you're feeling nervous and feeling the butterflies, chances are your opponent is feeling the same way.
Yeah.
So, I always, because I talk to a lot of competitors when I go to these events, and I ask them, how you feeling, and some of them will say that they're nervous, and I always remind them that, what's the difference between nerves and excitement? You get the same butterflies in your stomach, right? You're obviously, your heart rate's up, right? But there is no difference between nerves and excitement.
Yeah.
You just choose whether you harbor that or channel that energy positively or negatively, right? The nerves can get the better of you,
Yeah.
right? Or the excitement can help lift you to the occasion.
Yeah.
And so that's why, I like to be calm, because I know that the occasion is always going to lift me anyway, right? When you get out there and, there's a crowd and there's lights and all these things are happening. Now, some people say that they zone it all out. Yeah, you can absolutely zone it all out, but I want to also remember these memories and these experiences as well.
Be in the moment.
Be in the moment. Really enjoy it. Like if a lot of times people are shitting themselves and they go, why am I doing this? It's like, well, no, don't feel that way. Just enjoy it, right? Win or lose, doesn't matter. Because reality is, you win a fight, you the next day, you're still the same person.
Yeah.
Right? You lose a fight, next day, you're still the same person.
Yeah.
Right? The only pressure that you put on yourself is the pressure that you put on yourself.
Yeah.
Right? So if I win a fight and then go, oh, okay, well, now, I feel like this pressure that I need to keep winning. Well, no, you don't. Right? If you lose, I feel this pressure now that I've got to turn it around. No, you don't. Like, just get back to focusing on what were the deficiencies. And I always call this the rule of thirds, where, we put a lot into preparing for competition or an exam or something like that.
Yeah.
Then we spend the time actually doing the competition, the event, the exam, or whatever it is. But how many times do we actually debrief with ourselves and take that time to actually reflect on that experience and then go, okay, let's go back and actually, almost like giving yourself closure.
Yeah.
So I'm very big on that. So that's why, after my fight, yes, it's content for my channel, but I went through and I debriefed, the fight, what were the mistakes that I made, what were the things that, I should have done better. And that's so that I can have closure on that.
Yeah.
And that's also so that I can develop those pathways in my mind that the next time that I'm in those positions, what would I change? What would I do differently? Because if I never actually take that time to sit there and go, okay, because I did this, this was the outcome, then I'll just continue making the same mistakes.
Yeah.
So one of the best things that anybody can do in life, whether it's you're chasing a promotion that you maybe didn't get or a pay rise that you didn't get, right? Rather than blaming somebody else and saying, oh, this person effed me over or that person effed me over and that's why it didn't work out. You ask yourself, how are you complicit in the outcomes that you're receiving, right? Complicit just means that I'm not taking full accountability that necessarily it's fully within my control that I can get this done or that done. But there is a level of my actions that will help me to get this specific result.
Yeah.
And so if I start to realize that maybe it's 20%, maybe it's 30%, maybe in some instances it could be 80%, right? But I have this complicitness to be able to do something that's going to influence the outcome, then perhaps I'm going to be more complicit in or take more accountability for my actions as a result of it.
And it's self-awareness is key. And what people need to do is, for example, if you're part of a gym and you're part of a team and you're not competing in a particular comp and you see other competitors go into that comp, you see some of your competitors, not all of them is going to win. So the ones that lose, you generally congratulate them and you move on. People need to see how they themselves react to their teammates going through that, because what generally happens is that you might lose a comp and then you'll be like, oh my God, like, what are these people thinking? What are these people like? You put all this pressure on yourself, but really they're not thinking anything.
Yeah.
They're doing the same thing that you did when you saw them lose a comp. It's like, you'll get better. That was amazing. Like, you went in there, you gave it your all. Can't wait to train with you again. And then when you go into a comp, if you lose, it's the same thing. They're thinking the same thing. But you got to be self-aware enough to understand that people want the best for you. And you want the best for them. The way that you react when they lose something is a way that they're going to react when you lose something. And how is that? That was amazing that you went in there. Let's go train, get better, and do it again.
Yeah. Yeah, I think everybody's got those demons no matter what the endeavor they do. And I'll give you an example, say like doing the podcast, right? Sometimes I'll reach out to somebody to try and book a podcast, right? And then let's say for whatever reason they don't come back to me within a couple of days. In your head you start going, oh, okay, well, like obviously they don't like me or whatever the case may be. All the demons come out and you start blaming yourself and you go, oh, I'm not very good.
I had that same thing with Paul Saladino.
Yeah.
There's this Carnival MD.
Yeah.
He's liked my content a few times and I've messaged him and he's like, yeah, I'll come on a podcast. Then time goes by. I tag him in something and then he'll comment me again and is like, oh yeah, email us and then we'll do this podcast. And then I shoot through the email and then I don't get a response. And it's like, bro, you've said twice that you're going to do it. And then you feel bad. You're like, but
what have I done?
He's got a million things going on. You know what I mean?
Yep.
And me myself, I don't get messages and I'm late to respond and I'm going to judge this guy for not responding, but really it's all internal.
Yeah. You internalize it. It's your own dialogue that's, making you, and that's part of your ego having this fear of failure, right? It's trying to tell you, you should stop trying.
Yeah.
If you stop trying, we don't have to feel this way.
Yeah.
Right. And once you do that, well, you've lost. Yeah. Right? That's the battle, right? Like you need to drown out that noise because I think far too often people always ask the question of, why should I do this? Why should I do that? Right? When the real question should be, why not? Just go and do it.
Yeah.
Right? People go and talk about, I want to start, saving money. Okay, we'll start saving money.
Yeah.
I want to buy this investment. Okay, we'll buy it.
Yeah.
Right? What do they call it? Analysis paralysis. You overanalyze things so that you just do nothing.
Yeah.
And so then the net effect on your life is that nothing changes. And then you go, oh, why am I still in the same spot?
And a lot of people have this how do I do this? How do I do that? Let me watch all of these things on how I can do it. And then let me buy all of these things that will tell me how and how and how. And in the end, they never do it. The thing is, do it.
Yeah, you're going to learn the most when you actually just commit to it. And, you know, like a lot of the guys and girls that have come on the podcast, a lot of times, you know, we're seeing a snapshot of them in their current state that, you know, they might have a successful gym or they might have this or that, you know, doing very well in business. But how did they get to that point? You know, I had Tim Fung, my mate who's CEO of Airtasker, as an example. He's come on the podcast a couple of times. And it's like, you know, I know Tim from uni days where it was like, you know, we're all nobodies, you know, just trying to work out, you know, what is our place in the world. And then suddenly, you know, he's got a company that's gone IPO and you go, wow, how do you get to that spot? Well, it happens over time, you know, but you have to start somewhere and keep putting in the actions. And then that may then become the outcome of what, you know, what is the result of all of those collective little actions. Yeah. But you never started that journey with the idea of, oh, I'm going to take a company to IPO, you know, like people want to think like that, but no, it was like, okay, what is the need in the marketplace? And it's like, okay, there's a gap here. So can we provide a solution for that? Okay, yes, we can. And then as the solution gets bigger, oh, now we need to think about our IT systems, our website, you know, our platform. How do we now do this? You know, and then you start hiring more and more people, and it sort of just snowballs from that. Yeah. So I want to go back to, you know, you arriving in Perth, you're picking up the language.
Yes.
Right. How would you describe yourself as a kid in high school?
Mate, I was... It's interesting. There's this girl called Misha. And never dated or anything, never like something, there's this girl called Misha, this is the girl that I wanted, nothing to do with that. In primary school was a bit of a harder adjustment, this Brazilian kid coming over and not really knowing the language or anything like that, having some, you know, self-confidence issues and all of that. When I got to high school, I'll never forget this. She's living amazing. She's got a kid, like power to her. We were really like good friends. And the thing that changed for me in high school was her comment in the bus. We were at orientation day.
Yep.
And I sat on this bus, self-confidence low. And the girls were just talking about like who's cute and all of that, who's good looking and all of this. And then she said me, like out of all the kids. So then this got the girls like talking, right? Yep. So this brought me a whole new entry into high school. This sounds really weird. And from then, I think my confidence skyrocketed. And then I got into music. And music, this was a big sort of music school. And that was quite good. And I was one of the kids that, like, because I had all these self-esteem issues, all these issues in the past, and from the primary school, from, like, since I came to Australia, I understood all the guys that were going through that. And then I would hang out with some of the musicians because I did a bit of music, and then I'd hang out with the cool kids because of her comment on that bus.
Yep.
And I think that comment was also because we were sort of like, at that time, it was only really me and her in our grade that she was from New Zealand and I was from Brazil. Everyone else was Australian pretty much.
Yep.
So I think that was also her own, as I psychoanalyzed it, it was also her own thing putting forward the kid that's like also foreign.
Yep.
And propping him up, which then would prop her up.
Yep.
Like that's just me psychoanalyzing it. But yeah, in high school, I was one of those kids that just hung with everyone. I didn't really have a group. and I guess moving around so much also, catered to that as a kid.
Yep.
But yeah, I had fun. Teachers loved me or hated me. That was the only two options. One of my mathematics teacher came up to me and she was trying to do something like give me some not detention, but there's detention, home detention.
Okay.
It's really bad detention. And she said after class, she held me back and then she goes, "You're lucky you have friends with the right teachers." So the teachers that was above her that said, "Nah," they backed me over her.
Yeah.
And that's how it went. It was either like teachers loved me or teachers hated me. I had the right teachers on my side. And I propped up the little music section. I wasn't too much of a athletic kid. That came a little later. But yeah, I think I enjoyed high school. I just was terrible at listening also.
Well, I think when you play up a little bit in class, like yes, there are teachers that it rubs the absolute wrong way. But I think there are teachers that, they secretly, I wouldn't say secretly, but they like that.
Yeah.
You become a little bit more memorable when you do things that are out of the ordinary.
Yeah.
And sometimes not even intentional, right? Like it's just, I think, like I'll give you one example. So my wife and I, we actually went to the same school. She was in the grade below me. And what happened was we went back to school to film some things for our wedding. And we ran into our old Japanese teacher, Miss Ogara. Shout out Miss Ogara.
What did he teach? What did he teach? She
taught
teach?
Japanese.
Japanese.
Yeah,
right,
and
gotcha,
so it was funny because like when we ran into her, it was like she was like, "Oh, Johnny, I remember you." And I was like, you always have a. She was like, "I always have a soft spot for the naughty boys," right? And so I laughed, right? And then my wife was like, "Oh, Miss, do you remember me?" And then she's like, she looked at my wife and she didn't remember her. And my wife was like so gutted. She's like, "I'm like such a good student," and I was like always attentive, and it's just like you don't get remembered.
No. Did you ever go back to your reunion? I wish I went back. I need to go to maybe possible.
I think we only did one at 10 years. We didn't really do one at 20 years or anything like that. So I haven't really. I keep in contact with some of the guys, and we chat pretty regularly.
Yeah.
And we're still very close, I should say. We had part of the reason I started this podcast was because one of our mates actually committed suicide in 2019. So Adrian. And so, he was having some troubles and unfortunately, he left us. But I think that also helped to keep us close together. Like we always check in on each other and make sure everyone's okay.
Yeah.
But I guess, it's not to let, something bad that happens in your life go to waste, so to speak. I that's part of the reason why I do this because, I want to honor his memory and honor some of those stories that I've shared throughout the podcasts. And then also capture other people's stories as well because you never know what happens. One 100%. Day when your kids are older, like they might want to go, "Oh, what was Dad like at that point in his life?"
Yeah.
And it's pretty hard. Like, I know for me, I never really cared, what my parents were like when they were younger until I've gotten older. And then I've realized that, they weren't just mum and dad this whole time. Like they had their own lives, they had their own things. And, a lot of people think that mum and dad had their shit sorted out. And a lot of the times they don't. They were just fluffing their way through just like we fluff our way through life, right? So when it came to the end of high school, did you have... Oh, actually, one question before that is music. So what do you play?
Guitar.
Guitar.
Yeah.
Were you self-taught or was that something that you...
Self-taught.
Yep.
All self-taught. I produced music for a bit, recorded people, set up my garage to have people come there. This was when Aussie hip-hop also hit the scene.
Yep. So
we were really into punk rock.
Okay.
And then we moved into a bit of hip-hop.
Yep.
But yeah, no, all self-taught, I wish I self-taught myself piano because people don't understand that piano is the greatest instrument that you should learn, period. Because when you move into production, you can play any instrument with the piano. You can't really do that with the guitar. The guitar is beautiful. pick up an acoustic around a campfire or something.
Yep.
It's fantastic.
Yep.
Like you can't really beat that. But if you're gonna, produce or do anything with music itself, piano is key. It's key for pitching. It's key for across the board. So yeah.
And okay, so with that in mind, I guess when you finished high school, did you have any idea what you wanted to do?
Nah, I had absolute no clue. I think I was a bit lost. I wanted to do at one stage I wanted to do electrical engineering, and I went into I was such a bad kid. Like I didn't have great grades.
Yep.
You know what I mean?
Yep.
I wanted to do music, and I wanted to be creative, and then I wanted to have this spout of electrical engineering. I don't fucking know why.
Yep.
And I went to Fremantle to this to do this electric engineering bridging course into TAFE.
Yep.
Into uni from TAFE, and yeah, I think I was just a bit all over the shop, which probably made me want to move back to Brazil, and then that's what got me over to Sydney, because it was the closest place that I could find to Rio in Australia. Because my mum was because when I was all right, I'm a kid, I want to move back to Brazil because of my cousins are all happy.
Yep.
She was like, there's more opportunities in Australia. Just try another city for me.
Yep.
And then if you don't like it, go to Brazil. And then I came over to Sydney, and I enjoyed Sydney. Just did businesses and here. Yeah.
Okay. So when you came over to Sydney, you flew over, I'm guessing?
Yeah.
Yep. Had you already worked out, where you were going to live, or did you just come over with a suitcase and just go, I'm just going to work it out here?
Came here with $2,000.
Okay.
That's it.
$2,000 in your pocket.
$2,000 in my pocket. I joined a dragon boating team.
Yep.
Actually represented Australia in dragon boating in China.
Okay.
But I joined this dragon boating team, and then someone gave me accommodation from the dragon boat team itself, and then I lived with him. I started building restaurants and doing labouring, and I did my diploma of business, and then went into university for my bachelor's. And yeah, that's how I came. I was just came over, flew over, $2,000. If it's gonna work out, it's gonna work out. If it's not, it's not. And luckily, I survived.
Was it a one-way ticket?
Yeah.
Okay, so you hadn't really thought about, if it doesn't work out, I can always exit back to Perth. It was okay, we're going here on a one-way ticket.
To the most expensive city in Australia.
How did you even, I don't get how you land and then it's okay, what am I going to do? Let's go find a dragon boating team to join. It's just so random.
It is. It's, there was one guy, Jerry. He's a Chilean, and I had seen him once, and I messaged him, and I was he's a mum's friend.
Okay.
Right? Only one guy that lived in Sydney. And then I messaged him, and I was just on Facebook, and I was hey, Adriana's son, you live in Sydney, and what's there to do here? And then he's oh, I do this dragon boating thing.
Okay.
And I was okay. And then I just went to it. I just went to it, and the coach of the dragon boating, this Chinese bloke, he built restaurants with a bunch of these Malaysian workers.
Okay.
And I was the only one that wasn't Asian on the job site.
Yep.
And it's literally the most dingiest job site. There's 4 of us, and we're doing the most dangerous shit. There's no there's no health and safety at all. And they're all I'm learning Cantonese and speaking to them in Cantonese, and mate, thinking back on it, it is the most wildest experience ever. And yeah, they some of them don't like illegal immigrants and shit. It was, it's wild, man. It was wild. I came over, and I think in the back of my head, I was I'll do this for my mum, but I know this is going to fail. I'm just doing this, and I'm going to go to Rio. I'm going to get the fuck out of here. So I just did it, expecting it to fail, but I learned a lot about myself in terms of just surviving in general.
Yep.
And and I also I left without completing high school.
Oh.
So it was 6 months left of year 12.
Wow.
And I said, fuck this. And came over. And then you'd think everything would fall apart then, but no, I ended up going to university and everything like that. So it worked out, man. It worked out.
So what did you study at uni?
Bachelor of, don't recommend it, Bachelor of Commerce, and I majored in international business.
And why don't you recommend it?
I don't recommend it because I think things like marketing, things like commerce, economics as well to a degree.
Yeah.
You can really learn outside of university. I think university, you should go in it looking for a particular specialization. Like if you're going to do open heart surgery, go to university.
Yeah.
Like if you're going to do business, start a business.
Yep.
You know, go knocking on businesses, give your flyers out, because the world revolves around two things, right? The business world. It revolves around product or service. So you're either going to develop a product and hit on every single door and try to sell that product, or you're going to supply a service and hit on every single door and supply that service. So studying business is like how. It's back to the how. How do I do this? How do I do? Let me pay for this. Let me pay for that. To regurgitate things over and over. Like with business and marketing, I think you should just do it. Find what your service is or find what your product is and go sell that.
Yep. At least try.
Yeah. And mind you, like you're not going to succeed straight away. Like you'll find someone, a million %, you'll find someone that gives you a chance. If you want to do SMM, right? You just go to a business and be like, look, I'm starting out. I am okay at managing ads. What is your return on investment on this ad? Let me manage it for you, your ad spend. And if I can tweak your ad spend to increase this ROI, I've given a benefit to you. And I'll do this at a low cost because you're helping me by assisting me in my development. And if I can achieve this for you, do you know anyone else that does social media marketing that you know? And they'll put you onto someone else. And then slowly you'll do those building blocks to achieving a client base. And business is that simple. Open heart surgery, little bit more complicated.
So the way I describe businesses is that there are sort of 3 distinct tiers in any business. Right? And so when I say that, so let's take your SMM example and let's see if it applies to this. But if you're going out and starting your own business and you want to do social media marketing, well, when you start this business, you're the owner, you're the manager, and you're the employee, right? And each of those 3 roles actually have distinct operative capacities, right? So as the employee, well, that's you physically looking at the ads, that's you placing the ads, that's you making sure that your hashtags are right, all of these sorts of things, you know, doing the actual daily task that's required for that. But you also operate in the capacity as both the owner and the manager in terms of finding the work, you know, quoting the job, invoicing the job, doing your own accounting, all that sort of stuff. So you're doing all 3 of these roles as the one individual. Right. And this is why, you know, people that start their own businesses, they generally learn very fast. Because you have to wear these 3 distinct hats. Now, let's say for whatever reason, you start doing really, really well because that first client refers you to another 4 clients, and you get to this point where you go, look, I actually don't have the capacity to do the daily tasks anymore because now I'm managing the social media accounts of 4 different businesses. And I've got to get content made. I've got to do this. I've got to do all these other these other daily tasks. And then you go, okay, well, I'm going to expand and I'm going to hire somebody. You know, whether it's a content creator that goes and creates content or somebody that places the ads, etc. So straight away now you've gone to, you're still the owner, you're still the manager, you're still the employee.
Yeah.
But now you've also got another employee working with you. And over time, let's say that your business develops to this point where now you've got so much work that you've got people, employees that do the daily tasks, so that now you can focus on just being the owner and the manager.
Yeah.
Right? So as the owner and the manager, your frame of references are a little bit different. So the employee is always focused on what do I need to do today to complete the job.
Yeah.
Right? The manager is looking at it from the perspective of, okay, what do I need to achieve within this month to make budget?
Yeah.
Right? And then the owner's looking at it from the perspective of, what is my budget for the year?
Yeah.
Right? So there's like these three sort of distinct categories that operate in any business.
Yeah.
You know, whether it's social media marketing, whether it's plumbing, whether it's whatever it is.
Yeah.
But what happens is that as any business grows, then the delineation between those layers is what becomes apparent. Because, you start getting a roster of employees. Now you're doing the owner and the managing.
Yeah.
And then you get to this point where it's like, oh, business is going really, really well. I need somebody in accounts to do the invoicing and all these other things. So you might put in an account manager.
Yeah.
That then takes up that second role. So then it's like, okay, me as the owner, now what do I need to think about? How do I grow this business? How do I expand? What is the next market I need to approach? So, you know, that's one of the ways that I've sort of my lens in terms of how I look at businesses.
Yeah.
And so in any enterprise, when you're beginning, you've got to wear all three hats. You've got to learn all three roles. Doesn't necessarily mean that you stay like that, unless, you know, you might like doing all three and you just want to keep a business small. Absolutely. Right. So I guess, you know, for you, when you first, so after the labouring and the building of the fit outs of restaurants and things like that, what did you move into?
So after that, I moved into IT.
Okay.
So I was in a
one of the boys is trying to hide from the camera. He's shrimping in the background with his bag, trying to get out.
Love it. And
good shrimping.
And yeah, I moved into IT. So I moved into it was a managed services business, but quite a large one. So I was 2IC in marketing at that, which we had this was before what we do now, right? Zoom calls. So our head of marketing lived in New Zealand and I was the person in Australia doing the bit of running around. But yeah, I moved into the IT space. So, and I've just, continued down that for a while, always in a marketing capacity. Yeah.
So just to reflect a little bit about those roles. So I guess what were some of the things or lessons that you learnt, you know, working on these job sites with these Asian guys, you know, teaching you all the bad Cantonese words as they're swearing and cussing as they've hit their hand or injuries occur?
Like you learn to deal with anyone, and then I think that's quite valuable. I think with me, one unique aspect, and I think it's, how do I put this? One unique aspect that I think that I have is the ability to be able to deal with anyone no matter where they are at in life. So I was born in a farm, living with 7 people, farmers, go into favela in dirt poverty, go into middle class, go into job sites, go into a $90 million company, go to these events dealing with billionaires and millionaires. It's like, these are real people that I've had conversations and I've been in a room with. So that's one unique ability that I think I have, is that I've gone in the whole spectrum across the board, where, you know, some people might be born in high and be too snobby to others. Some people might be born in poverty and can't deal or have anxiety of dealing with people in suits. Like, I've worn the ripped clothes and I've worn the suits, and you know, it helps you develop so much more mentally, spiritually, in existence, in life, led me, into stoicism, led me into philosophy, things outside of what just business is and what we're supposed to do as humans.
Yeah.
And I think jiu-jitsu helps with that as well.
Yeah.
Jiu-jitsu is quite powerful, where you can have anyone from any walk of life come in and put a gi in and you don't know what they do.
Yeah.
And then jiu-jitsu is the language. So I think that's one unique item that even the job site has given me. It's like get thrown in, not only thrown into Australia and need to learn English, but get into these job sites where they don't know English and they speak a whole nother language that I don't. So it's also it's energy.
Yep.
And learning that energy and how to calm energy around people. I think was the biggest learning point of those job sites leading into the business and the corporate side of the world and existence.
Okay. And so then what was the inspiration for you to start your own podcast and do the 5-8 take?
The 5-8 take it was an interesting one. I've always loved Joe Rogan.
Yep.
I've listened to Joe Rogan for quite a long time. Back when there was little ice blocks coming down. I don't even know if people know, but Joe Rogan originally, it was him and this guy called Red Band.
Yep.
And there was this poster wall up and there was ice flakes coming down the screen and they'll just go on. And then after that, from his house, he went on to doing it behind the Comedy Store, which he just had a shitload of these salt lamps around. And so I was watching him since then. So I loved conversations. I was more intrigued in listening to interviews than I was to listening to music. And when I found that, when I understood that, I was like, wow, this is interesting to me because I came from music. So for me to now enjoy conversation so much, like The Breakfast Club is this hip hop show from New York. I wouldn't listen to the syndicated radio show. I'd listen to the interviews constantly. I'd be fascinated by these interviews. And then I was like, you know what? Why don't I do this? And I think it was 2019 was when I had the first episode. And I wanted to make it a comedy show. I didn't know what the fuck I was doing. I really did not know what I was doing. And I was like, this is going to be comedy and sports, because I also took some shots at combat karate when combat karate first came out.
Okay, yeah.
And those people came after me.
What do you mean they came after you?
Old videos, just comments and all of this. And it's like, they were like, you don't know what you're talking about. And sure, I don't. I'm still figuring life out. and then...
Wait. Let's pause on that. So what happened? So you took some videos when Karate Combat came out?
Karate Combat came out. So... I had a YouTube channel which got quite big before they shut me down on the pandemic, right?
Okay, yep.
And so this YouTube channel, I would analyze some martial arts as well.
Yep.
And I'll just make comedy videos, just fucking around.
Yeah.
And when the first Combat Karate event came out, now GSP owns it.
Yeah.
When it first came out, they try to make it this grandiose UFC event.
Yep.
And it was just funny to me at the time. And then I was like, I said that this has moved completely away from traditional karate, and that, I don't know, I pretty much went full traditional on it.
Yeah.
Where this was full modern aspect. Yeah. You had MMA gloves, you had no shirts, and the thing was like a square pit thing. Yeah. And so I just made fun of it. And that pissed them off so much. There was these diehard, this is the savior of karate. And they just came after me. And And I was like, and then I just started doing, just started doing content, just playing at that space, just making fun of them and trolling them.
Oh, wow.
And then, and then after that, the pandemic hit, and I still had comedy. So I love comedy because, like, I'm uncomfortable to deal with situations, so I laugh at situations. So then the pandemic hit, and then things went AWOL.
Yep.
And I started getting these political people on. I used to do the podcast with this one other person, and there was one other host and then a producer. The producer went and did Qantas ads for the pandemic.
Oh, wow.
He was like the main actor in it, and full,
Yep.
in the system. And the other one, we sort of, I don't know, he just didn't sort of want to do it anymore.
Yep.
He was another musician. And so then I was just like, you know what, I'm still doing it. Like, I started by myself. These guys came on, and then I'm still doing it by myself. Like, I'm not going to stop. This is what I love and enjoy.
Yeah.
And so I started having these people on that were, organizers of these rallies, and I knew shit or nothing about politics at all. And these people would come on, and I'd get like messages being like, oh, you shouldn't have these people on. But it was chaotic times, right? And it just grew. It grew. Like, our listener base was just across multiple, like, I think we won a badge for like 52 countries in like really fast on Transistor.
Yeah.
It was just like our listener base just skyrocketed. And then I was just like, this is insane. Like, this doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
And then YouTube started getting really, really harsh, and that was my main platform at the time. And I had a few doctors on, and then YouTube just shut me down straight away.
Yeah. So they didn't strike you first? Normally it's like 3 community strikes, no?
No community strikes, just straight, we removed your account.
Wow.
And I was gutted, because it's not like I had, now I'm backing everything up, like multiple drives. Like, I don't just put everything on one
online
thing.
And then,
Yeah. And now you can link Rumble as well, so you can have all your whatever you post on YouTube go straight to Rumble as well. So you got 2 copies there, and then I copy it on a hard drive too. But back then, that's all I had. So they shut me down on YouTube first, and then my interview back was Robert Malone. Who then went on Joe Rogan and did his thing, the inventor of mRNA, which is a great guy. He's fantastic. We had like a long conversation. He loves Portugal. He's also from a farm, like super rich guy, deals with the CIA, deals with the government from all angles. Like, he's incredibly intelligent person, has multiple patents and technologies that he's invented. And so I don't know what he was doing speaking to my dumb ass, but it worked out. And the podcast just kept growing, man. Just kept growing, got me into a lot of trouble. But I don't really regret it all. Any of it really. Yeah.
It's a very interesting space, where the internet has made information so freely available, but then like now people want to restrict the freely available part of it. Like, when the internet came along and you could pretty much access almost anything, right?
Yeah.
I think that helped the development of a lot of things, and jiu-jitsu especially, right? Where, because people can watch match footage and watch combat footage, and then they can go and study it and take things apart. I think that's leading to higher quality outcomes, because people are taking these, looking at what the best do, and then trying to implement that into their own game and trying to reverse engineer it, so to speak. And, I guess the Chinese, that's what they've been great at, like they take a piece of technology, they reverse engineer it, and they go and then go, okay, well, we can now create that same thing. And then they build off that platform, rightly or wrongly, right? So, in some instances, perhaps there is infringement of copyright, maybe there isn't, or maybe the patent's expired, or whatever the case may be. Or there are companies that are willingly happy to hand the blueprints over and have them produce it for the capitalist benefit of having cheaper labor, etc. Right? So there's no, I don't say that, rightly or wrongly. I just say the freedom of information is so important to development.
Yeah.
Right?
And that's what Gordon Ryan said. He said, whoever has the technology will win in the end.
Yep.
And he's referencing Brazil and America and the accessibility that Americans have with money to access these instructionals, which before they couldn't. And then when you look at ADCC and you look who wins and who didn't regarding countries, Brazil's always won. But now you see these newer development countries that now have the technologies to access these instructionals. They now become a lot better, which is to that point.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think there was there's no doubt in my mind, part of the reason why the instructional thing came through was because because of the freedom of information that people can go and review match footage. People were studying it, and so then that created an opportunity for these guys to then go and say, oh, there's a market here for people who wants to sort of reverse engineer what we're doing. Well, we might as well then, if we know it's going to get reverse engineered anyway, we might as well then produce it.
Yeah,
and then at least we own that content. We can sell that content, and there's some monetary benefit to it, right? Rather than going, oh, you can't do that, we're going to sue you or whatever. Just go and actually make the content, make it available. And at the same time, because I almost view it like in gaming, where when there's a new patch that comes out, it sort of changes the balance of the characters or whatever the case may be. It's the same thing in jiu-jitsu, is that the meta that is, the current in thing, we saw it when the Danaher Death Squad first appeared and leg locks were the thing. Yes, leg locks are still highly prevalent in jiu-jitsu, but if you look at, what happened at in certain competitions, it's like leg locks are leading to the back. And then so it's sort of changed the meta, and so every time, these sort of innovations, they come through and then they make, it could be that meta that takes out the competition in that particular year. But the next year, people are so well versed in that meta that it's now changed and new opportunities arise as a result of it. So, just going back to the podcast thing, it's a very strange journey doing the podcast thing, isn't it? Because you don't really think about, that other people are listening. Like, you sort of, when you do it, you just sort of, whatever, you just talk.
Yeah, you just want to have, especially with guests, you just want to have conversation with these people. When I reached out to Paul Saladino, I'm like, hey, mate, do you want to have a chat? Because I want to speak to you. I want to understand this meat-based diet of yours. I want to understand this carnivore diet. I want to know why you believe it's so effective, and on the other side there's all these people listening and it's fascinating to me. It's cool, but I literally going into guests, it's always going into I want to see what this person is, how they think and what they're passionate about is really what I care about. But the guest interviews have always been interesting to me, because when I moved from us two as a duo thing where we just talk to each other and moved into guests, it's always skyrocketed from there.
Wow.
Which has always been interesting to me.
See, I wouldn't do this thing solo. It's just, I don't. For me, that's not interesting. It's always interesting to talk to somebody else, and I like to know. I think there's a lot more commonality in people than there are differences.
100%.
But it's just interesting to find out their perspective and how they've come to this conclusion that this is how they view things. And I like that. I like to find out how people grew up and try and listen to what are some of the similarities and what's some of the differences. And then it's because I've done that so many times now, it's I can go and see where different people have sort of taken this particular moment in their life and, for better or worse, made a decision about how this has impacted them. Right? And for some people, they continue to live and be defined by it, but for other people, it's okay, they've accepted it and moved on. So, that's the part that I find interesting, because the podcast is really just a snapshot of where you are at this stage in your life.
100%.
when we close the podcast and this is all over, you know, you might be a very different person in 2, 3, 4 or 5 years. Like I think for me, I'm a very different person to who I was 5, 10 years ago.
And I love it, like catching up with people that I interviewed from like 2020 and see where they are.
Yep.
That's fascinating to me as well. I've done that a few times and it's super cool.
Yeah.
And because I don't know about you, but I listen and watch to a lot of podcasts as well. So it's also cool seeing their journey. And it goes back to what you said before about, you know, parents, and then seeing like it's cool to see where they were.
Yep.
And I find that awesome as well. Just seeing the progress of a person and through one interview or to another. And yeah, reaching out to people. It helps with, I guess, the detachment and anxiety that people may have in this day and age. Like maybe myself, I do like being secluded in my own world as well. So the podcast also, in a way that I'm understanding now, has also helped me to reach out to people and get to know people at a deeper level than small messages or small voice notes that are done this day and age. Like if you're sitting there speaking to a person for over an hour, you get to know them a lot more.
Yeah.
And
it's more memorable.
Yeah.
Yep.
And it's something that I absolutely love about podcasting, especially in the time period that we live in right now.
Yeah. All right, let's switch gears a bit. I always like talking about, you know, families and relationships.
Yeah.
It's an interesting topic because, you know, some people don't like talking about it, but and that's fine if there's anything that you don't want to talk about.
Yeah.
But I'm just curious, you know, you've got a young child now.
Yes, I do. Yes, I do.
Henzo. And it's been life-changing. Oh, Henzo is his name.
Henzo's his name.
Wow. Okay.
Yes.
Very jiu-jitsu inspired.
Yes, it is.
Was there any debate in the household about whether you could get away with Henzo or not?
There was a bit of a setback, but I see, for all the males out there, this is how you get the names that you want, right? So you throw out a name that you like. In this case, I threw out Henzo. Then your partner knows you. So in my case, she knows that I'm very much a stoic. I love the stoic philosophy.
Yep.
So I was like, all right, so what do you think about Henzo? And she's like, and then I go, if not Henzo, I think a great name will be Aurelius. Let's call him Aurelius, and then you really push for the Aurelius. Let's call him Aurelius. Aurelius is... And then she's like, no, we can't call him Aurelius. All right, Henzo's all right. So, hey, that's for the dads out there.
That's it. So you push the name that you really want first. You just throw it out there like a little bit of bait.
Throw it out there.
Throw it out there as bait. And then you go with like the extreme name.
Extreme name. Yeah.
And then hopefully your partner will settle on the slightly less extreme name that you really, really wanted.
Yes.
So now that you've gotten away with it on the first one, I don't like your chances if she listens to this of getting away with it on the second one.
I blew that out.
I guess, you know, for you, becoming a dad, right? And I know that people that don't have kids, it's very hard to appreciate how life-changing it is.
Yeah.
But I guess I'm curious in terms of your experience, you know, because I guess for me, you know, when my wife was pregnant with our first, I didn't really feel anything until that moment when she came out.
Yeah.
And it was like, wow, and this outpouring of emotion.
Yeah.
Right?
That was like me as well. I didn't even believe she was pregnant at first. I was like, nah, are you sure?
Yeah.
Are you sure? And I delivered him. So we did a complete home birth.
Oh, wow.
And I paid an arm and a leg for a private nurse. There was going to be 2 midwives that were present, but they didn't get there in time. So I filled up the whole bath. I got everything ready. Like, I even got the cameras because she wanted to film it. So she wanted to have it at home. And yeah, as I said, we had these 2 midwives organized, but they didn't really get there enough. So everything was myself and her. Grabbed him out, gave him a kiss, put it on her chest, clamped his umbilical cord, cut his umbilical cord. So it was a incredible primitive experience.
Yeah.
And the bond is out of this world. Like, you see his face, like you go through your day, and when you get home, it's like, it's so adorable. And what I find is that you truly want. It's the first time that I felt that someone else mattered more than my, like, literal life. Like, in my head, that kid can go and do whatever he wants, and just like in a video game, he has one life, and that's my life. And that's the first time I ever felt that. He can make whatever mistakes it is, and he can use my life for that mistake. And I'm truly comfortable in saying that. Like, it's one of those things, there's no fear of my death for his life. And that's the first time I ever felt that as a human, which was incredible. And then his smile is just fucking, yeah, it's the best, man. People, like, I don't understand how people go about this world being like, I don't want kids. Like, it is something else, and you can't explain, like, words can't explain what it's like. And yeah, through the primitive nature of delivering him, yeah, the connection and bond is immense. I can't describe.
Wow, that's amazing. I think, part of the reason, and there's no right or wrong in it, and the reason why I say that is because having kids is a sacrifice. You do need to sacrifice. You need to
so much
reassign your priorities, right? Because the things that were important to you prior to having kids quite often don't end up being important after.
Yeah.
Right? And I've seen that, with my own sort of life journey in terms of career, I don't care as much about money and all these sorts of things anymore. I care more about, the time that I can spend with my children.
Yeah.
And I sort of view it as like, I've got all this time in the world, as they get older, to then go back and make whatever money that I want.
Yeah.
But I've only got this limited time when they're this big or this small. And I think, like, it's scary for some people, because it's like, you got to put life on hold a little bit.
Yeah.
You don't have to, you can choose to just still stay at work and all that sort of stuff. But is that really then fulfilling you? Like, I think you got to make that decision in terms of what is important. And then people go, oh, well, money's important. And I think, this is a very big trap in the automotive industry, is that guys, they get carried away with trying to make all this money, and they go, well, what do I need for my family? I need all this money. And people lose their relationships and they lose their families over it.
Yeah.
When all their partners and their children want is time with dad.
Yeah.
Right? So, I've reflected a lot on that, and that's what influences me a lot in terms of my thinking towards, children and family. But you mentioned something before about the stoicism, and I'm very curious about your philosophy in terms of, I guess, religion, first of all, and what sort of developed you to, or put you down this pathway of this stoic thinking.
I like understanding frameworks for existence and why we're here, how we live, what's the best way to live, what has history taught others, not only like what is life and what is the point of life, but how do we navigate life, and is there a way to navigate life? And so I looked into a shitload of philosophies and religions, Judaism, the Abrahamic faiths, looked into Buddhism, Hinduism, a lot of the pagan faiths, and philosophy is not Stoicism is not necessarily got to do with any religion per se. It's literally a framework with 4 virtues of how to live your life and the best way to live your life. And I just came to that particular philosophy, and I was like, yeah, this makes sense. Like, all others just like sure, there's Schopenhauer and Nietzsche and so on and so forth that seems like it's the philosophies of the world that we live in today. But when I looked at Zeno, when I looked at his history, when I looked at Marcus Aurelius being one of the last golden emperors, when like Diogenes, looking at these boxes that were also Stoics, and I was like, why is there so many Stoics in our history? And when I dived into it, it's like people that were truly poor, like truly slaves. Like Epictetus was a slave. Like he then broke out and taught emperors. Like that is an incredible human being. And then you've got like scholars that are also Stoic. And it's like Stoicism branches from like my life, from poverty to the richest of riches are Stoics. And it's a formula and a framework that allows you to look at self. And that's the key of Stoicism is having control of your emotion. It doesn't mean don't be sad. It doesn't mean any of that. It means just have pure control and understanding. And one of the things of Stoicism is memento mori, which later on allowed me to understand the cross of Jesus. So memento mori just means remember death. Remember that death is inevitable. Understand it, face it, and then live each of your day knowing that it's there, but don't be worried about it. And that's the same to the cross. I was always like, why the fuck are we looking at this cross and wearing this cross and putting this cross around everywhere if this cross embodies the death of Jesus? Like if Christians truly believe that this is God, you're walking around with the thing that embodies the death of God. Is that not insane? And that's what I was like thinking like deeply about. And then memento mori allowed me to understand that. To me, I was like, why don't we wear the fish? It represents knowledge, represents Jesus. We should all walk around with a fish. And then, but when you understand memento mori to its true essence, you really understand the cross, and you understand that you know that resembles death of life, and understand that this you must live right now in this moment. And that's the correlation. There's a lot of correlations because Stoicism came way before Christianity, right? So there's the 4 virtues of Catholicism as well. So they're very much in line with the 4 virtues of Stoicism. And I just felt it was the best philosophy for me. And in a religion sense, yeah, I'm still figuring out, truly believe that there's a God. And I'm just taking it day by day. I mean, you can't be, it's weird. Religion is it's one of those items that the basis of religion is love and should be love. But then when you say you're from any religion, all religions are like, no.
Yeah.
But like, that doesn't make sense to me. Like if you be a pagan and love Zeus, whatever, like if your basis is that and your basis is believing in a God, really all other religions should be like, okay, he's on the right path of believing in a God. Because believing in a God is just believing in a higher being, something that's higher than you.
Yep.
And if you believe in that, you live for that. Like Nietzsche said, when Nietzsche said God is dead, people end Nietzsche there. But he meant God is dead. What comes next? Like, what do we replace God with? If it's humans, what does that inevitably intake for existence? And religion should look at other religions and appreciate them. Appreciate that people are like, God exists. Because at the end of the day, it does. It any other method doesn't make sense to me. There's a great there's a contingency theory for anyone looking at that has a mathematical and logical brain that's looking at religion. Go look at the contingency theory. Go look at PhDs. It's something is contingent to another being, and like a glass, a table, anything is contingent down to the molecule, and that explains a logical sense of God, and it's the closest thing that I've come to actually having that mathematical explanation, even though, and then you go beyond that. Then you go beyond the feeling, the soul, and so on.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's the stoicism is what I believe is the greatest framework that humans have ever created for life and for living. And then there's this spiritual religion aspect of that, which I'm still figuring out.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I would say everybody's on the journey, right?
Yeah.
Some people just don't know it and they say religion means nothing to me. And so for me personally, I don't like to look at religion per se, what I like to think of. So I think the first question that everybody needs to ask themselves is that, do you believe in God or a God, that a God exists, right?
Yeah.
Because I think even if you view it, let's say you're a polytheist and you have like all these different deities, the way that you can sort of think about that is that before you can have multiples of anything, you have to have one. So ultimately there is one God or one creator, whatever you want to call it, right? And another way that I like to look at it, and shout out to Peter DiPrinzio, because he was the one that mentioned this to me, is like, if you go and look at a painting, right? And you see this beautiful painting, at the end of the day, for every painting, there is a painter.
Yeah.
Right? When you look at a child, there is a parent, or two parents, so to speak. So if you think about creation, there has to be a creator.
Yeah.
Right? And I like that. I think it's a very simplistic way to sort of view it.
Yeah.
And the way that I always sort of think about it is that, if you think about the Big Bang, right? And you just, like, the image that I always try and portray is like, you just think about this really still lake. But then you take away the sides of the lake. So this lake just goes, it's just like flat. And then you take a finger or you take something and you go and touch just in the middle of that lake. And you see all these ripples coming out. And because there's no sides of the lake, the ripples go on for eternity.
Yeah.
Right? That's almost like the Big Bang. So the question is whose finger was that?
Yeah.
Right? And so that's what leads me to believe that there is a God.
Yeah.
So
what surprises me, not to cut you off, but what surprises me is that for existence, that's what people believe from all walks of life that didn't even speak to each other and weren't able to get anywhere. It's just that feeling. And what surprises me is just that there was just one guy, Dawkins, that comes up with this theory. And then everyone takes that and sort of, not everyone, but a large portion of people take that and run with it. But like, I don't like it. Through the beginning of time, we just appreciated it different ways. But everyone believes that. There's a God and there's a creator.
Yep.
And I can't understand how people don't see that. But that's just how I view it.
I think a lot of people get, turned off by the idea of religion, right? And I don't think that there's a right or wrong in that. I just think that, ultimately, that's why I say it comes back to that first question of where do you stand in your belief that there is a God or that there may be a God, right? And then I think the secondary question that is important from that is that, okay, well, if you believe that a God exists, what do you want your relationship with that God to be, right? So I'd liken it to, like, say, your parents, right? So, you know, you could have a dad, but you may have never experienced him in your life. Maybe he left your life early for whatever reason, whether he passed away or he's, you know, elsewhere in life.
Yeah.
So, you know, the fact remains that you've got a dad.
Yeah.
The problem, the point is that, you know, what kind of a relationship do you want to have with this person?
Yeah.
You may not want to have a relationship with this person, and that's okay too. But if you want to have a relationship with that person, well, then what does that look like?
Yeah.
Right. And so that's why then you now you're starting to go into that more religious aspect of, okay, well, if you want to worship in a particular way, you know, in terms of whether it's Christianity or Buddhism or Judaism or Islam,
Yep.
so be it. Right.
Yeah.
That's your expression of your faith. But the question that, you know, I go back to is, you know, what I always ask myself, what do I want that relationship to look like? And so, you know, for me, I think it's very important from that perspective is that you know, if you want to have a relationship with anyone, you need to have dialogue.
Yeah.
Right? You need to talk.
Yeah.
You know? And, you know, people would say that, well, that's praying. Okay, you can call it praying. You know, I call it dialogue. I could also call it prayer. You know, with my wife, we call it prayer together.
Yeah.
You know? But I think, you know, that's what I think is very interesting is that, you know, people get very bent out of shape about institutionalized religion.
Yeah.
But I think ultimately, if you believe that there is a God, so to speak, well, then the next question is, what does that relationship look like for you? And I think that is an important question for anybody to ask themselves, because like at the end of the day, and you know, Rob Fletcher, who has been on my podcast, and I attended his funeral recently, but he had terminal cancer,
right?
And the doctors basically told him, you know, you're effed. You need a miracle, right? And so at that time, he was in the hospital bed. His daughter was with him, and he grabbed her hand and he said, "Well, look, there's going to be a miracle. You know, either I get to live, and I get more time with the people that I love, or I move on from this world and I go and be with God. And either way, both of those things are miracles."
Yeah.
And he was so at peace with the notion of death that's almost like a superpower. And the reason why I say that is because when we leave this world, we leave it to our kin, you know, the people that remember us, right? And so, as a child, like if I was to think that was my dad, right, and I put myself in his daughter's shoes and go, if that was my dad, and let's say that my dad had a very different reaction to facing his own death, and he was like, oh, you know, fuck God, you know, why has he given me this disease, blah 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 blah. I hate, you know, life. I hate everything, blah 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 blah. That anger, that hatred could potentially flow into her. Yeah. And she's like, you know, like I've just lost somebody that is so important to me that I love, and I blame God for this. Right? And that becomes her resentment, her hatred. Yeah. Right? But because he was so calm in the face of death, I feel like for her, yes, it's emotional that you're losing somebody, but you're also a bit more at peace knowing that they're at peace with it as well. Yeah. Right? And I think there's something beautiful in that even though, you know, our existence is transitory or transient, so to speak, that we can have this lasting impact on the people we leave behind. Yeah. Yeah.
I think for those that are atheists, at minimum, look at the Stoic philosophy, because it sort of teaches you how to be calm in and having that understanding of life and death. So, yeah, for those particular people, I think that's a great avenue to go. But yeah, completely agree. Like that's a beautiful thing about religion, is that it helps you understand that. It helps you understand the metaphysics of life. And I think that's very, very, very important. Otherwise, there's a control mechanism that will inevitably overtake us if we don't believe that there's something greater than us.
Well, you become very centered around what you leave behind in this world, right? Like you become very egocentric,
Yeah.
right? And like, that's one way to live, but is it the best way to live? Is that going to provide you with fulfillment? Because at the end of the day, at least from what my experience, when you achieve a goal, so what?
Yeah. How
Right.
long is immortality fun?
Yeah. Right?
You know?
You probably want it to end at some point.
Yeah.
When you say,
At what point does immortality become torture?
yeah, that's right. And look, the excuse might be, well, I still haven't experienced everything that life has to offer.
Yeah.
Well, if you're alive today, you've got that choice. You make that choice to experience what life has to give you.
Yeah.
Right. I think that's a beautiful way for us to sort of bring this podcast to a close. If people want to find you, how do they find you?
You can go to @the58take on all platforms. Come to Braddah Jiu Jitsu in Artarmon, have a few rolls. Otherwise, yeah. Or email me, man, at the58@gmail.com. Yeah.
Okay, cool. All right. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for listening.
Cheers, guys.